I used to think my mother's favoritism was just something I had to live with, a permanent shadow that stretched over my life but never completely consumed me. I had spent years convincing myself that it was just her way, that some mothers had favorite children, and that I just happened to be the less fortunate one. I swallowed the unfairness, the subtle digs, the way she always looked at my younger sister Tasha, like she had been sculpted by the gods themselves while I was merely there. But I never thought she would take it as far as she did. Growing up, it was always Tasha and me, two sisters, only 3 years apart, but living entirely different lives. Tasha was the golden girl, beautiful, charming, and effortlessly magnetic. She had an innate ability to wrap people around her little finger, and our mother was her most devoted admirer. It had been that way since we were kids. If Tasha wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I had to justify why I deserved it. When we were teenagers, my mother spent weeks helping Tasha prepare for her school talent show, picking out her outfit, sitting through every rehearsal, and beaming with pride as she stood in the front row, recording the entire performance. When I won a citywide writing competition the same year, I got a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before she went back to talking about Tasha's big moment. It stung, but I had learned not to expect more. By the time we were adults, the patterns had long been set. Tasha was still the one who could do no wrong. Every boyfriend she had was treated like royalty, invited into the family with open arms, while any man I dated was met with skepticism and backhanded comments. My mother once told me over coffee, "You need to make more of an effort, sweetie. Men like a little sparkle, and you don't always bring that," she said, stirring her cup absent-mindedly. I had laughed it off at the time, pretending I wasn't affected, but I remembered every word. Then there was Daniel. I met Daniel 3 years ago at a friend's wedding, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something Tasha didn't. He was kind, steady, and completely in love with me. He wasn't drawn to flashy charm or games. He loved the way I thought, the way I laughed, the way I was. For the first time, I had something real, something that didn't need my mother's approval to feel valid. Of course, that didn't stop her from trying to undermine it. From the moment she met Daniel, she had an opinion. He was wonderful, of course, but he could do better. Maybe he just hadn't been exposed to the right kind of women before. Maybe he was settling without realizing it. "You know, Daniel, Tasha has always been the type to turn heads," she mused one night at dinner, swirling her wine as she smiled too widely at him. She said, her voice sickeningly sweet. I had felt Daniel tense beside me. He had already learned to see through her. "Well, I'm more interested in the kind of woman who holds my attention, not just turns heads," he said, his hand resting on mine. He said, squeezing my hand gently. But my mother never gave up. Every holiday, every family dinner, every opportunity she had, she pushed. She compared me to Tasha, made little comments about how men loved confidence, about how I could learn a thing or two from my sister. Daniel always shut her down in the most polite way possible, but it never seemed to discourage her. If anything, it made her more determined. Tasha, to her credit, wasn't actively participating in it, at least not at first. She played the role of the innocent bystander, claiming she hated when our mother made those comments, but she never exactly shut them down either. It was the same at my engagement party. While I was glowing with happiness, surrounded by people who truly supported me, my mother had found Daniel near the bar and cornered him with one of her signature unsolicited pep talks. "You know, sweetie, marriage is a big decision," she had said, her hand on his arm like she was offering wisdom instead of poison. She said, her tone dripping with concern. Daniel, always the gentleman, had nodded but said nothing. "I'm just saying," she continued, "you have options," she added, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Options. That was my mother always reminding me that I wasn't enough, that someone else was always the better choice. Daniel didn't tell me about that conversation until later. He hadn't wanted to ruin the night for me, and I loved him even more for that. I knew she was difficult. I knew she had always seen me as second best. but I never thought she would try to outright sabotage my life. I never thought she would take things to the level she did. Looking back, I should have known better. I should have known she would never let me have something Tasha didn't. I just never imagined she would be bold enough to try and buy Daniel's love like a cheap commodity at an auction. It started with a text, just one. A simple little notification that lit up Daniel's phone while we were curled up on the couch, planning the details of our wedding. He had been scrolling through venue options, showing me different locations, when his screen blinked with an incoming message. I felt him stiffen, his body tensing against mine. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting up. I asked, noticing the shift in his expression. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just stared at his screen, his jaw tightening, his fingers gripping the phone a little too hard. "Daniel?" I pressed, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. I pressed, my heart starting to race. He let out a slow breath, then turned the screen toward me. "You need to see this," he said, his voice quieter than usual. He said, his voice laced with anger. I took the phone from his hands, my eyes scanning the text message. The sender. "Mom. Daniel, let's talk. I have an offer for you. Leave Lena, and I'll make sure you're well taken care of. Tasha is a better match for you. Prettier, younger, a real catch. You'd have a much brighter future with her. Let's be reasonable. I can make this worth your while. Name your price." The words blurred in front of me, my vision swimming as a sharp, hot anger coiled in my chest. "Is this some kind of joke?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I whispered, my hands trembling around the phone. Daniel shook his head. "I don't think she's joking, Lena," he said, his voice low and serious. He said, his lips pressed into a thin line. I felt sick. My mother, the woman who was supposed to love and support me, had just tried to bribe my fiancé to leave me. Not just leave me, but replace me with Tasha. My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to march over to her house and demand to know what kind of mother could do something like this. But more than anything, I felt a pain so deep it nearly knocked the breath out of me. She really didn't think I was enough. Daniel reached for me, his hands warm and steady on my arms. "I would never, ever take that offer," he said, his voice firm. He said, his grip tightening protectively. "I know," I said, swallowing hard. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But knowing that didn't erase the betrayal. The worst part was, I couldn't even say I was surprised. It was shocking, yes, but deep down, I had always known how she felt. She had spent my entire life making it clear that I was second best, that I was the afterthought, that I wasn't Tasha. I stood abruptly, pacing the length of the living room, my heart hammering in my chest. "She thinks she can buy you," I said bitterly. I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Daniel scoffed. "She really does," he said, running a hand through his hair. He said, exhaling sharply. I turned back to him. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my hands clenched at my sides. I asked, my voice tight with emotion. Daniel's expression darkened. "We're going to show her she messed with the wrong person," he said. He said, his eyes flashing with determination. That's when the idea formed, sharp and cold and full of righteous anger. For years, I had swallowed my mother's cruelty. I had let her favoritism slide, let her treat me like I was lesser, let her comments roll off my back. But this was a line she had crossed, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from it without consequences. I took Daniel's phone and snapped a screenshot of the message, my hands surprisingly steady. "We're exposing her," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I said, my decision made. Daniel studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Tell me what you need," he said, unwavering. He said, his loyalty unwavering. I swallowed the lump in my throat and met his gaze. "Everything," I said. I said, my anger solidifying into resolve. I stared at my mother's message, the words burning into my mind like a fresh wound that refused to scab over. She hadn't even tried to hide her intentions, hadn't sugarcoated it, hadn't even pretended to feel guilty about what she was doing. In her mind, she had done something perfectly reasonable, offering my fiancé a better option because clearly I wasn't good enough. A slow, seething rage built inside me. I had spent my whole life swallowing her favoritism, convincing myself it wasn't worth fighting over. But this wasn't some passive-aggressive comment at a family dinner. This wasn't ignoring my achievements while showering Tasha with praise. This was an outright betrayal, a slap in the face so sharp it left me breathless. I wasn't going to let it slide. "Do you think she told Tasha?" I asked, my voice tight with barely restrained fury. I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Honestly, I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised," he said. He said, his expression unreadable. Tasha, the golden child, the one who always had my mother's unwavering devotion, who never had to fight for a scrap of attention because it was handed to her like a birthright. Did she know? Had she been complicit in this? I needed to find out. Without giving myself time to second-guess it, I grabbed my phone and called her. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Lena, what's up?" she said, her voice light and airy, like we were about to chat about nail polish instead of something that might shatter our relationship forever. She said, sounding completely oblivious. I gritted my teeth. "Did you know?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. I asked, my voice sharp and direct. Silence. Just a beat too long. Then a hesitant, "Know what?" she said. She said, her voice suddenly careful. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. "Mom, the text, the bribe. Did you know she was going to do this?" I asked, my pulse hammering in my ears. I asked, my breath coming quicker. Another pause, then an exhale. "Lena, it's not what you think," she said. She said, her voice tinged with guilt. My body went cold. "So you did know," I said, my fingers tightening around the phone. I said, feeling like I had just been punched in the gut. "I didn't look. I didn't ask her to do it," she rushed to say. She rushed to say, her voice rising in pitch. "But you didn't stop her either, did you?" I snapped. I snapped, my anger spilling over. More silence. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. "Of course you didn't," I said. I said, my stomach twisting in disgust. "Lena, come on, don't make this into a big—" she started. She started, her tone turning defensive. I cut her off. "You know what, Tasha? I really don't want to hear it. You had the chance to tell me, to warn me, but you just sat back and let Mom do her thing because, as always, it benefits you," I said. I said, my voice shaking. She let out a sigh, annoyed now. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. She said as if that made it better. "No, you just benefit from it," I shot back. I shot back, my resentment boiling over. I hung up before she could say anything else. Daniel watched me, his expression dark. "She knew," he said, more a statement than a question. He said, his voice heavy with understanding. I nodded, swallowing down the lump in my throat. "She knew." I repeated, the words like poison on my tongue. I had spent my whole life watching them treat Tasha like she was the center of the universe while I was left orbiting somewhere in the background. But this was something else entirely. This was cruel. I looked at Daniel, my resolve hardening. "We're exposing this," I said. I said, my fury solidifying into determination. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said. He said, unwavering in his support. I opened our family group chat. My mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, cousins, friends, everyone who had ever been in our orbit. And I posted the screenshot of her text. Then I added a message of my own. Since Mom likes to play matchmaker with my life, I figured everyone should see what she's been up to. This is the message she sent to Daniel, trying to bribe him to leave me for Tasha. "I'm done pretending this behavior is okay. If you still want to be associated with someone who would sell out her own daughter like a business transaction, that's on you." And then I hit send. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes, my phone blew up with notifications. My Aunt Claire was the first to respond. What the hell is wrong with her? Then my cousin Rachel. Lena, I'm so sorry. This is disgusting. A flood of messages followed. Shock, outrage, some people defending my mother because, of course, there were always people who would rather keep the peace than acknowledge the truth. She was probably just trying to help. My Uncle Greg typed, ever the apologist? You know how she is. Yeah, and that's exactly the problem, I fired back. Then, my mother's number flashed on my screen. I stared at it, my stomach churning. She's calling, I muttered. Showing Daniel the screen. He arched a brow. You going to answer? He asked, his tone unreadable. I pressed the decline button. Nope, I said, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. The fallout from the group chat had been immediate, but the real firestorm came when my mother realized she couldn't control the situation. She had spent her whole life manipulating people, carefully crafting a world where she was the victim, the loving mother whose ungrateful daughter just didn't appreciate her sacrifices. But this time, she had no way out. She couldn't twist this into something harmless. You don't understand, Lena. Tasha, she needs someone like Daniel. She's younger. She has more to offer. You have to admit, you've never been the sparkling type, she said. Her words cutting deep. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, willing myself not to scream. Then I smiled, because for the first time, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't broken. I was furious, yes, but I wasn't that girl desperate for my mother's approval anymore. Thank you, I said, my voice eerily calm. I said, feeling something shift inside me. She hesitated. For what? She asked, suddenly wary. For finally saying it out loud, for finally admitting what I've always known, that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was never going to be enough for you, I said, my voice steady. Lena, don't be dramatic, she scoffed, her tone dismissive. I shook my head, a strange sense of relief washing over me. I'm done, Mom. I'm done playing this game where I pretend you actually care about me. You don't. You never have. And I'm not going to let you be a part of my life anymore, I said, the words coming out with certainty. Her breath hitched. You don't mean that, she said quickly. She said, her voice finally cracking. I do, I said simply. I said, meaning every word. There was silence on the other end. Then, in a last desperate attempt, she hissed, If you cut me out, you're going to regret it. You'll see. She hissed, her voice venomous. I smiled, shaking my head. No, Mom. For the first time in my life, I think I'll be just fine, I said, feeling lighter than I ever had before. Then I hung up, and just like that, I was free. In the days that followed, something strange happened. The weight I had carried for so long, the silent, crushing pressure of always being second best began to lift. It was as if cutting my mother off had also severed a part of me that had spent years waiting for her approval. And now, without it, I felt lighter, freer. Daniel and I moved forward without hesitation. We finalized our wedding plans, adjusting the guest list to remove the dead weight. There was no debate, no second guessing. My mother wasn't invited. Neither was Tasha. The family had been split in their reactions. My Aunt Claire was firmly on my side, calling me just hours after everything blew up. Good for you, she had said, her voice filled with conviction. Others, like my Uncle Greg, weren't as supportive. She's still your mother, Lena. You'll regret this one day, he had warned. His tone laced with disapproval. I didn't bother responding. The truth was, I didn't regret it, not for a second. My father had remained silent throughout the ordeal, sending me a short text days later. I don't agree with how your mother handled things, but I hope you'll come around. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He had spent years watching her treat me like I didn't matter, and he had done nothing to stop it. His silence was its own betrayal. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected, and when I stood in front of the mirror in my dress, I realized something. I was happy, not just happy in the way I had been before, when I was constantly bracing for my mother's next jab. The next moment she would find a way to remind me I was never quite enough. No, this happiness was real, pure. Daniel stepped into the room, his eyes widening as he took me in. "You look incredible," he said, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. He said, his voice thick with emotion. I smiled, smoothing down the fabric of my dress. "I feel incredible," I admitted. Meeting his gaze. He walked up to me, brushing his fingers against mine. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Searching my face. I took a deep breath, really considering the question. Then I nodded. "Yeah, for the first time in a long time, I really am," I said, my heart swelling with certainty. We had the wedding we wanted, surrounded by people who loved us, supported us, and wanted nothing more than to celebrate our happiness. There was no tension, no whispered judgments from my mother, no forced smiles from Tasha, just joy. And as I stood there, surrounded by warmth and love, I realized something else. I hadn't lost anything. I had only gotten rid of what was never really mine in the first place.